ahead. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. So before I start lecturing, I already answered a lot of questions on the, I don't know if you heard the lecture on from Monday, but I answered a whole lot of questions. But anyways, I wanted to know if any of you have any questions before I talk about some theories that could be useful for your case studies. I already mentioned one or two. Again, if you listen to the lecture from Monday. Any questions? Some of you are going to be presenting on Monday. Some of you will be presenting on Wednesday. You don't have to listen to everybody's presentation if you don't want to, but you should obviously attend your own presentation. So those folks that are going to present on Monday don't have to come to class on Wednesday and listen to the folks that are going to present on Wednesday. And those folks who are presenting on Wednesday certainly don't have to listen to the folks who presented on Monday. What else? Next week, as you know, also, of course, there's the group presentations, but the week after that is the midterm, as well as when you meet your client. Last time I checked, the GGA problem, which in my opinion is harder, is winning, but I'm all about the people. I'm all about whatever you guys choose. So that's what you want to tackle. I say go for it, but it is harder. It's harder than the Good Doctor. Georgia, let's see. No, you do not. I don't need to see you on camera. All I need to do is hear you. Is our paper due the same day as our presentation? Yes, Megan, that is correct. No, Georgette, your paper is due on the day that you present.
Wait,
So
so I have a question. So since my group is group one that's presenting at 11:55 a.m. on Wednesday, March 17th, that means we have until that morning to post our stuff on Portfolium and all of that, or should it
that's
be
correct.
okay?
That's correct.
Because I don't know why I just thought that it was going to be due for everyone on Monday to make it fair or something. So okay, that clarifies a lot. Thank you so much.
Life isn't fair. And 48 hours honestly doesn't make a big difference in quality of content.
I have another question.
Shoot.
It's not related to like the group project per se, but I was just wondering, since you're offering extra credit for attending the ETC panels, does that reflect in our grade like towards the end of the semester when you input it in, or will we see it like soon in our grade?
You should see it as soon as I record it.
Okay, so like since I know right now there's only been one that which was like 2 weeks ago for extra credit, so then whenever you record it, it'll just go in.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You should be able to see some sort of like small little tiny bump in your grade, at least in terms of your number of points. Good question, Angela. Um, it's better to have it. Well, it's honestly better to have it in your PowerPoint, but if you want to include it in your paper, that's fine. If you want to include it in both, it's perfectly okay. Well, what do you mean they can't make it to the scheduled presentation date, Jaylene?
So we're scheduled to present on Monday, but our group chose Wednesday because some of us work on Mondays. So I was just wanted to clarify, like, what if we can't make it to the presentation day? Like,
Yeah, okay. But according to the syllabus, right, presentation days were on that whole week.
so are we gonna get marked down if a team member doesn't show up, or?
Yes, they're supposed to show up.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
That's the 1 week that's synchronous. I don't understand your question, Alexa. Well, Alexia. All the case studies will be on the that we've read up to that are been assigned so far will be on your midterm. Although really you guys are jumping the gun talking about the midterm because you really should be focused on the case study. At least the group presentation, that's it, should say. I don't know what you mean, Georgette. Even for the presentation, I'm not clear.
Like since we have to upload our own portions to Portfolium, even like the day that we present our stuff, since we're only speaking on behalf of what we did, that means like our group presentation grade is like also individual, or is it collectively how we did like presenting as a whole group? Does that make sense?
I'm grading you individually on everything.
Okay, thank you. That
Mhm.
clarifies.
Okay, is there any other questions that's not pertaining to the midterm?
I had a question for the uploading it to Portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Are we uploading the paper or and the presentation?
Yes, both.
Both, and then the whole paper, or just our parts of the paper slash presentation?
The whole thing.
Okay, got it. Just making sure. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the group project? Okay, so I think I left off talking about Gramsci and cultural hegemony. So, um, so did your particular case study, did it work out because of hegemony? And so, for instance, this really applies to things like movies and television programs. And so the idea of cultural hegemony, right, is this idea that there's belief amongst the Frankfurt School scholars, these guys, these intellectuals from Germany who saw the rise of the Nazis. And essentially they believe that media, right, has an embedded message in them. And so, for instance, in the United States, some would argue that there's embedded messages in the content that we see. For instance, this idea that, almost always we see the good guy win, right? In our movies or television programs, the bad guy loses. Almost always we celebrate the idea of meritocracy, this idea that you simply can succeed in life through just simply hard work. And there's no other things that can stand in your way, right? This, like the idea of racism or sexism or any of these isms aren't necessarily a factor or play a role in your success. You can overcome all those things through simply hard work, which, by the way, is partially true. Um, Also, this idea that we celebrate the idea of capitalism, the idea we celebrate democracy, these things are all sort of embedded in our pop culture, and so we see them over and over again in our society, and so therefore they become hegemonic. In other words, we don't really think about them because it's just so commonplace that we don't question. And essentially what these Frankfurt School scholars said, right, was that this ideology that we see embedded in our pop culture comes from the elites, right? From the people who are controlling our messages, people who make our content, media content, movies, those sorts of things. Now, that being said, Gramsci did say or argue that culture is constantly changing. It doesn't stay static, and the reason it doesn't stay static is every once in a while, right, we have people who critique society. So in media, for instance, you could have a documentarian who makes a documentary like The Social Dilemma that essentially critiques our society for being in love with our social media and really kind of exposing the fact that these social media companies are just trying to get us to fight against one another, and they're using algorithms to do that, to really create conflict, and they're making money off of our conflict. And so really what it's doing, right, is painting a picture or presenting a mirror for us saying, you guys need to wake up, right? What are we doing? And if you think about music, also the early days of rap, there's some artists that still exist that essentially still critique society by pointing out the social ills of our society, what's wrong with our society, those sorts of things. And so one of the things that Gramsci talks about is this idea of hegemonic negotiation, this idea that our society changes, right, over time. This enables the elites to remain in power. So, for example, right, rap at one point in time, we disliked it, or at least we were threatened by it. The elites were, not me personally. And so, what the elites do is that they end up essentially creating labels, for instance, that essentially where they now make money off of rap, for instance. This idea, for instance, for a long period of time, there was interracial marriage wasn't allowed on screen for a long time. And so over time, of course, the idea of not having interracial marriages on screen is now kind of weird to us, right? And also at one point in time, the idea of traditional man and wife sort of thing, marriages or relationships was also that's all we've seen at one point in time in our pop culture. And, now we see, same-sex couples, all sorts of things on our screens when it doesn't even bother us anymore. It's just, it's just whatever. And so that enables the powers to remain in power. And that only takes place through what they call hegemonic negotiation, which means our culture changes, our culture evolves, our culture expands in terms of what is mainstream and what is marginalized, and this keeps the powers that be in power. Any questions on this idea of hegemonic negotiation? Okay, so another Frankfurt scholar, this actually, him and Gramsci, by the way, this guy are amongst my favorite theorists, only because they give us the benefit of the doubt, and I like when people give us the benefit of the doubt as opposed to just a no. So Walter Benjamin was essentially, or Benjamin, as we learned in graduate school, he actually was another Frankfurt scholar that actually doesn't survive the war. He actually commits suicide because he thinks he's going to get caught by the Nazis. And so he takes cyanide as opposed to getting caught by the Nazis. Although the people that he was with actually did escape the Nazis and were able to flee and get out of Europe. So anyways, this idea of aura, this idea of things being original and unique that have an aura, he does believe that's a thing. That's a possibility that something does have an aura because it's original or unique. If you ever go to France, to, for instance, La Louvre, to see the Mona Lisa, for instance, right? You might, if you've ever been to the Louvre over in Paris, you might think to yourself, oh my God, it must be the most phenomenal museum ever. And I'm dying to see the Mona Lisa. And because it's inaccessible, it essentially, in your mind, you think of this idea of perfection, right? This is why he calls it a cult value, this idea of high art in museums, this idea that it's inaccessible, that creates an aura for something because it's inaccessible. He doesn't like the idea of aura. He doesn't believe that things should be inaccessible. So, for instance, right, if Walter Benjamin was running museums, for instance, he would say they shouldn't charge any money for you to access this museum. The art in the museum should be accessible to everybody. because as soon as you provide access, you take away aura. Does that make sense? This idea that if you make it accessible, it no longer has aura. If you make it inaccessible, it has an aura. So for instance, another example, Coachella, Stagecoach, because they charge so much money, and some of you will save all year just to go to those concerts, which, I find it admirable. This idea that you can save up $500 in our economy, where things are so expensive, in a year, that's pretty cool. But anyways, the idea of Stagecoach and Coachella and some of these concerts being so expensive that are inaccessible, he would dislike that. He doesn't like the idea of aura. Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly right, Georgia. The idea that we romanticize it in our head, right? This idea, another example would be these stars that sometimes you see. You see them on billboards, and you see them everywhere. And I'll get to this, but they also have an aura. So yes, we romanticize this idea of going to Coachella, going to the Super Bowl, going to Stagecoach, going to see your favorite band, but you can't afford it. Those sorts of things. So basically, what Walter Benjamin argues, and mind you, he wrote this book in the 1930s, right before he died, and so this is still considered one of the best texts when it comes to studying media. This idea of studying technology and in the age of reproduction. I think I forgot the exact title of the book. Anyways, in his book, he talks about this idea of mass production, this idea that you can produce lots of copies with this nowadays through the internet. Now, mind you, right, if you think about even before the internet, the idea of printing machines, and you can make lots of copies with the printing machines. Also, the idea of better distribution. You can now place things in more screens, for instance. The idea, again, of the internet. Everybody can have access to it with the internet if you have, internet access. Through marketing, through things like commercials, billboards, social media, all those sorts of things. Aura essentially becomes lost. In other words, you don't need to go to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa anymore. If you can go onto your internet, I'm sure you can find a digital copy of the Mona Lisa on the internet. And so because you're able to access these things now, some of these things, especially art, aura is lost, right? So now you might look at the Mona Lisa, digitally speaking, look at it and go, that's really, everybody makes such a big deal about the Mona Lisa. That's the Mona Lisa. Doesn't look that cool to me. I don't really need to go to the Louvre. I don't really need to go to Paris anymore to check out this piece of art. Because in essence, right, when aura is lost, really what we're saying here with aura lost, that we become more critical of things because aura is lost. So for another example, the first time you dated your significant other, if you have a significant other, when you first met them, right, you might have thought, oh my God, this person's, maybe not perfect, but pretty close to perfect, right? This other person. But once you get to know him or her, you start to see their bad habits, and you go, okay, I have to overlook this habit. I have to overlook this habit. I have to overlook this habit. Really, in reality, if you want any relationships to succeed, you really kind of have to overlook the 3 biggest habits that annoy you. You got to overlook those things. And really what I'm talking about here is the aura's lost. You're really seeing this person with a more critical eye because you're around them. You're more aware. And so anyways, when it comes to pop culture, right, going back to pop culture, Benjamin says this is really exhibition value because really aura's lost. It's all lost. And really aura started to get lost with the introduction of the photograph. Really, this is when cult value starts to sort of go away, and we start having the emergence of exhibition value. And so one of the things that Walter Benjamin talks about, and again in his book before he died, is that technology has the ability to democratize art, right? If you think about YouTube, I don't know how many of you post things on YouTube, for instance, or Vimeo or one of those things. But in essence, right, what YouTube enables us to do is essentially this idea of like, oh, I want to be a filmmaker. You know, this, it used to be inaccessible, right? But now with technology, you guys have the ability to also produce your own art and put it up for the world to see, whether it's you playing an instrument, you writing, you singing a song, whatever. So technology essentially makes it potential for us to be a more democratized society because you all have access to it, whether it's the access as a producer or access as an audience to critique. And so film, right, one of the things that he talks about with film is that film, we have two choices with film. Number one, and this is bad, is that film can encourage us to be passive. In other words, not think about our social or economic conditions. So obviously right now theaters in California are closed, but let's just say hypothetically they're open and they're going to be open at some point in time. And so let's just say that, you know, you're down to your last $20 and you decide, you know what, forget it. I'm bored of sitting at home. I only have $20 in my checking account or savings account. And so what I'm going to do is these last $20, I'm just going to go watch Black Widow because I'm dying to watch this Marvel film. I'm going to pay the $12 for the ticket. I'm going to buy a soda that's going to cost like $5. So now I'm down to $2. I don't know if you're going to spend any, I don't know if anything's worth $2 on in the snack bar nowadays, but essentially what I'm saying here is that you're going to spend all your money just to escape your reality that you only have $20 in your bank account, and you're going to forget about this for 2 hours. And then when you leave the theater, you're going to be like, oh, damn, I had $20, but now I have 2 or 1 or maybe none. And so one of the things that Benjamin critiques us about is that we use pop culture as an escape to forget about our social or economic conditions, which is not necessarily a good thing. Now, that being said, he also says that, you know, we as an audience can be critical, but it's all about the point of consumption. In other words, are we critically looking at something when we actually view it? Are we being active consumers of content, or are we being passive? So it's all about this, right? It's all about how we look at things. How, are we looking at things with a critical eye? So for example, right, going to, about your particular case study, did the audience look at your product with a critical eye, and that's the reason why it failed? Maybe yes, and maybe no, right? Maybe they were being passive and that's why it succeeded, for instance. So are they looking at things critically? Now, one thing to think about when you think about this point of reception, right, when we're actually looking at the product, unfortunately, one of the things that Benjamin talks about is that we tend to critique the new or the creative or the unconventional and accept the conventional. So for instance, has anybody ever seen No Country for Old Men? For instance, you should watch it, Georgia. But anyways, not to ruin the ending, but the ending itself is unconventional, right? And some of the biggest critiques that people had of this particular movie was the fact that it was not a conventional ending. And so why is that? It's because we're used to the conventional. We accept the conventional, even though it's the same boring conventional ending every time. We accept it and we walk out of the theater going, yay, right? And what's unconventional, or maybe there's a movie like Inception, right, where you're kind of like going, well, what exactly is the ending? I'm not really quite sure. You kind of critique it because of that. If that makes any sense. questions about that? So one thing that, or a few more things I should say. So obviously, right, Benjamin argues that this loss of aura is good, right? It's good that we get rid of aura because it makes things more democratic, it makes us more critical, and we end up not placing aura on celebrities or people, right? So for instance, we avoid having things like what happened at the Capitol, right? Just last month, when we start placing people on pedestals. I don't care who your politician of choice is, right? Whether it's Democrat, Republican, I don't really care who your favorite celebrity is, right? The point is that you shouldn't place these individuals on pedestals, and we should see them, right, as flawed human beings. They're not perfect, and so. But as soon as we start placing people on pedestals, we start having things. Dangerous things can happen when you place people on pedestals, and we witnessed some of that. What happened with the Capitol on the 6th, right? We saw an example of that when we place somebody on a pedestal and we just kind of like, do our thing. And so now, also loss of aura results in the loss of tradition potentially, which may or may not be a good thing, right? So, I mean, Benjamin would question the fact, why do we celebrate Christmas? What's the point? Do we really need to spend all this money on buying presents? What's the point, right? Are we just in essence keeping the man rich, or whoever the man is, or these powerful companies rich by spending money on gifts? He would say that, right? We shouldn't place things on. We shouldn't have aura of things or people or celebrities. Now, the dark side of technology is this idea that what we do oftentimes in our society, right, is because of technology. Think about the way people are shot. They look perfect, right? Celebrities look perfect. I don't know if you guys have seen a celebrity, really close and in person. Oftentimes, they're not what they appear to be in front of the camera without makeup, right? They look completely different. But because of technology, right, and because of makeup and editing and lighting and the way they're shot, they look perfect. And the way and through mass production, because we see them everywhere on our screens, and because they're highly promoted and marketed and distributed, so everybody can see them. In essence, we create something called we create a new aura, which he would refer to as the spell of personality, the cult of celebrity. So again, for Benjamin, it's fine if you have your favorite star, when you're a teenager. I don't know if women still post up posters in their bedroom of their favorite star crush. That was a big deal when I was a kid, right? The teenage girls would post up posters of teen idols, right? That's harmless in essence. But Benjamin says, well, that's harmless. But if you start placing people on pedestals like a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden or an Obama or whoever, right, it can be really dangerous once we start essentially placing people with lots of power on pedestals. He said it could be used as a tool for fascism. And again, he believed this because he saw the rise of Mussolini and he saw the rise of Hitler, and he saw how the mass media played an important role in elevating the importance, right, of Hitler or Mussolini. Any questions on this idea of placing people on pedestals, giving them an aura that nobody should have an aura? For instance, let me give you a more current example. just based on the interview, and I haven't seen the whole interview from the Meghan Markle interview. I've only seen snippets of it. I'm really not that interested, but I've seen snippets of it. Um, but Meghan Markle appears to me, at least, just on the snippets that I've seen, is that she had this, she placed this family, right, this royal family in England on a pedestal. They had an aura to them. She didn't understand that, they're just like everybody else. They're flawed, just like all of us are. And so if she had walked in, I think, understanding that we're all flawed, right? She and not none of us deserve this aura. And I'm not saying this would have avoided it, but I think it would have been less likely to have happened to, understand what you're walking into. Does that make sense? That you don't place people in auras because people don't live up to your expectations? Sorry, not to rain on your parade if you're a romantic. So another example, I'm not going to show the whole thing.
A long time ago, Hollywood movie studios developed a method to hire actors for a long-term period, with the goal of guaranteeing success for their movies. This was called the star system, and those contracts were huge and complex, ending up in the studios controlling the actor's life. And how did it work? Well, let's check the background first. In the 20s, sound was first introduced to film, and the industry was booming. The patent war against Edison encouraged producers to move to California, which gave birth to Hollywood, a place where they intended to produce films in high scale and develop a production standard pipeline. That pipeline was created by the owners of the Big Six companies: Paramount Pictures, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, MGM, Universal Studios, and the disappeared RKO. This also inspired on the Broadway method to develop actors in theater in the 19th century, and that was named the studio system. It had a lot of success and kicked off the golden age of Hollywood. It was based on the principles of business efficiency, economic rationalization, and hiring employees for a long-term period under exclusivity contracts. If an actor was signed, it meant that he or she was introduced into the star system, which meant really changing his or her life forever. Examples here are actresses like Audrey Hepburn, Greta Garbo, and Rock Hudson. After an actor was hired, the studio crew began to work with them to develop them into true celebrities. The intention was to spread an idealized image of the actor to the audience. Back then, a movie's success depended on the popularity of the cast much more than on the story itself. So for that reason, studios wanted to have a cast with demigod fame in their movies, to use them as the primary tool to promote their film. This is when names of actors started appearing prominently on movie posters. Florence Lawrence was the first actress signed for that purpose, and audiences began to flock to cinemas to see her. Companies used to come up with background, origin stories for their stars, and even changing their names, like in the case of Michael Landon, who was born as Eugene Orwitz, and Norma Jane Baker, who was renamed to Marilyn Monroe. The company monitored the actor's life and public behavior to keep the preferred reputation. Women were expected to behave like ladies and have a neat appearance with stylish clothes, and men were supposed to act like gentlemen in public spaces. Also, the studios arranged sham dates between single celebrities, and then gossip columns on the tabloids were tipped off about it, so a lot of photographers went there to capture those romantic moments. It was just free advertising. All this because the audience didn't expect a great story on the screen. They just wanted to watch their stars reflecting their reputation in their movie role. For example, Joan Crawford often played roles of hardworking young women who found romance and success, so her public life had to reflect that too. Same with Michael Landon. His roles as Joel Cartwright in Bonanza and Charles Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie had something in common. It's about a good-natured family countryman, his community, and his noble job, so the actor's lifestyle should fit into that. Another significant example was Monroe and her roles as femme fatale. Same with Greta Garbo and Marlon Brando. We can spend hours showing you.
So is there any questions on this idea that, this idea that studios use PR to construct an image, right, of celebrities, to give them an aura, to make them popular, so we can put them on a pedestal and then go watch them perform in a particular movie or television program or buy their album, those sorts of things. So did your particular case study, I don't know them all, or did your product or what you're examining, did it work because the star or the starlet had an aura to them? In other words, they almost can't miss. You can also sort of apply this to brands on some level. If you think about Marvel or even Disney, is that we end up placing these brands sometimes on pedestals where they can do no wrong.
A long time.
Any questions on the idea of aura? Don't place it. I guess the life lesson, don't place aura on people. Ever. Romantic, political, or otherwise. So two-step flow. Now, two-step flow theory was Paul Lazarsfeld. Paul Lazarsfeld is really one of the best calm media scholars in the history, really, of communications. Him and a guy by the name of Merton developed the idea of focus groups, which is something that's utilized very prominently in today's modern media. And so anyway, so two-step flow by Paul Lazarsfeld, this idea that he focused on voting habits. So initially, this theory came about because Paul Lazarsfeld was focusing on how do people go about voting and how do they get their information about certain politicians. And what he discovered, and he was examining the political race between, or presidency, I should say, between Roosevelt and Wilkie. And what he discovered was that there was these folks called opinion leaders, and these opinion leaders would intervene between you and the media. And so every single group, right? Every single group, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, whatever social group you want to think of, has essentially this opinion leader. And this opinion leader is the expert, or at least knows more than his friends or her friends regarding a certain topic, right? And so again, they're mediating between themselves, and essentially they're the mediator between themselves and the media and their group. So they're the middle person that's mediating this. And so now the problem, of course, with these opinion leaders, so yes, they may watch more media, they may know more about pop culture than their friends, but the problem is they may practice selective exposure. Like I have a friend who is hardcore Republican. I still love him. He's great. But I know, right? I know when he talks about politics and he's trying to like tell me about what's going on politically speaking. By the way, I'm more pragmatic. I don't like the idea of belonging to a party. But anyways, because I'm pragmatic and kind of just open, he'll like tell me, oh, this is going on politically. But I know, right? I know, even though he may know a lot about politics, I know that he practices selective exposure. I know it. I know. And so therefore I kind of like, okay, I kind of take his opinion with a grain of salt. And so that's what I mean by selective exposure. I know he spent a lot of time watching Fox, for instance. So you might be more knowledgeable about one or more topics, or you might be more famous. So for instance, a celebrity spokesperson could be, for instance, considered to be an opinion leader, even though are they really? No. And so this is why also some politicians use the idea of celebrities, right, to act as spokespeople for the masses. So for instance, whether it's Trump or Biden, they might use a certain celebrity, right, to get people who are fans of that celebrity to vote a certain way. And then, of course, we have the opinion followers, and the opinion followers listen to what the opinion leader has to say. In every single category here or social group has an opinion leader that knows more about a topic than his or her friends. And whether or not we listen to this person, right, really depends on several factors. And so one of the factors is trust. Do you trust this person? In other words, has this person ever lied to you in the past? Right? And so if they haven't lied to you in the past, then you trust them. Like, oh, okay, I know this person. This person is knowledgeable. This person gives me correct information. I trust him or her. Is the opinion leader, do you have the ability to have a flexible conversation with this opinion leader? In other words, if you disagree with this opinion leader, can you voice your opinion to this opinion leader without this opinion leader being upset at you, right? You know somebody's not in a good opinion leader if they just start yelling at you that you're wrong. For instance, if they're sort of more amendable and they listen to you and they go, oh, I kind of see your point. Guess what? That opinion leader is going to have more sway with you. No obvious agenda. So one of the reasons why my friend, who I love again, and he's quite smart and quite good about politics, even though sometimes, I don't take his side always, is that I know he has an obvious agenda, right? So again, the opinion leader has more power if the person has no obvious agenda. So for instance, if I tell you, I watch a lot of movies. And so if I tell you, oh, I should go watch this movie, I don't work for a studio, right? I have no obvious agenda. If I tell you this, you probably want to believe me because it's not like I'm getting paid, right? If you go watch this movie or not. So no obvious agenda. And casual meaning that, this is not a tense conversation. The topics that come up are quite casual, right? You're maybe having a glass of wine, you're having dinner or whatever. These conversations come up in a casual nature or in a casual environment. And so when things happen in a casual environment where your defenses aren't up, you're more apt to believe this person. You're also more apt to believe this person when you're just inundated with too much information. So again, even though sometimes my friend, I know who's Republican and I know practice selective exposure, I also know that he reads a lot about politics. And sometimes my God, I am just overwhelmed with too much to do. Trying to teach classes, trying to look after my son, trying to look after my pregnant wife, trying to make sure that, my mother gets her vaccinations. All these sorts of things are racing through my head. I have all these relatives and people that are around me that are sick with COVID. There's just too much stuff going on in my life to me like, trying to keep up with the daily news of what's going on right now in my life. Too much. And so because of that, when he sends me stuff, I might go, oh, okay, I'll believe it because I don't have time to do my research. I just don't have time. There's too much going on. Does that make sense about why, for instance, the opinion leader might have some sway? Really, this theory is really talking about the power of word of mouth. One of the most powerful things that can happen with any sort of product, right, is to generate a positive word of mouth. If you can get the opinion leaders on your side where they can convince the opinion followers to buy your stuff, you're going to have a successful campaign. But again, the challenge is trying to find these influencers. Who are these influencers that are going to sway people? So for example, I'm not going to show you the whole thing either for this. 2 minutes.
This week, we're taking a look at the top-earning TikTok stars. At number 5 is Josh Richards, who made $1.5 million. The 18-year-old gained quick fame for his dance, singing, and lip-syncing videos on TikTok. Richards also co-founded his own talent management company, Talent X, and his own drink business, Annie Energy. The teen says he's now focused on, quote, creating companies or getting equity in companies. At number 4 is Lauren Gray, who made $2.6 million. Until this spring, Gray had the biggest fan base of any TikToker, leading her to land sponsored content deals with Skechers, Hyundai, and Burger King. Gray also snagged a deal with Revlon, creating content for the company's TikTok account and Revlon-sponsored posts for hers. At number 3 is Dixie D'Amelio, who made $2.9 million. As the older sister of Charlie D'Amelio, who's number 2 on our list, Dixie finds her fame intertwined with her sisters. They appear in many of each other's videos on TikTok, where Dixie has more than 32 million followers. However, Dixie is striking out on her own with her music career. She released her first single, Be Happy, in June, which has accumulated more than 58 million streams.
Wow.
At number 2 is Charlie D'Amelio, who made $4 million. After posting on TikTok for the first time in June 2019, D'Amelio had a series of dance videos go viral last summer and fall. Her notoriety grew quickly from there. She's been on Jimmy Fallon, chronicled her time at Paris Fashion Week for Prada on TikTok, and struck sponsorship deals with companies like EOS Cosmetics and appeared in a Super Bowl commercial for Sabra Hummus. At number 1 is Addison Rae Easterling, who made $5 million. A year ago, Easterling was just settling into life at Louisiana State University and making choreographed TikToks. By fall, she had hit 1 million fans and was posting sponsored content with Aeropostale. Since then, she's become the main global spokesperson for American Eagle and launched her own makeup line, Item Beauty, as a joint venture with Ipsy, a San Mateo, California beauty startup.
Is there any questions regarding this idea of the opinion leader, the influencer? So again, thinking about your case study, right? Was it successful because they were able to get some powerful influencers to generate a powerful word of mouth to get people to try your product or to buy your product? Some people can make a lot of money, Georgette, doing this. It's no question. It's a lot of competition, but I don't know. I don't know what it takes to be an influencer, but it's interesting. Oh yeah. They're making more than doctors, lawyers, you name it. They're making a whole lot of money. Hopefully they're saving their money, because the thing with influencers, I think, is that they're fads, right? So you don't know how long their fame is going to last. Well, I think you wanted to be an attorney, Georgette. I think that I would say you can do both. You can go to law school and be a TikToker. All right, so Henry Jenkins' convergence theory. Now, this is very similar to what I just talked about, guys and ladies. Very, very similar. Yes, that's right. You can do both. And so, and by the way, you could always then legally protect your content as a lawyer. You don't have to hire a lawyer. So Henry Jenkins, who talks about the idea of convergence culture. And again, this is very similar to what I just talked about right now. Now, one of the things that Henry Jenkins talks about is this idea of media and how we interact with media changed essentially as soon as things became digital, right? It used to be that if you wanted to go, you really couldn't interact with content because it was in a physical form, like a book, or it was on film, or it was on television. But now, because things have become digitized, it's really changed the relationship between text and the audience or the reader. And so you have the ability now to interact and change text. Think about this, by the way, I love doing this sometimes when I have time, which is never almost. But some of you or some people are really creative just in terms of how they act out their favorite scene of a movie, right? They'll have their own friends playing different roles, and they'll create their own version of their favorite scene from a particular movie. And I always find that, pretty entertaining. And sometimes I think to myself, oh, they're pretty good. They should actually really be like, creating their own original content. This is pretty cool. So this is what I mean by interacting with the content. And so now, besides the internet taking off and changing our interaction with the content, he does acknowledge the fact that there's issues and problems with the internet. So for instance, we have this thing called a participation gap or a digital divide. The digital divide is essentially really talking about the fact that some of us, right, are blessed to have good internet connections. We can afford the internet. And then there's folks out there, and even some amongst you maybe, I don't know, that have issues just getting a good internet. Or maybe you can't even afford your internet in some cases. Or maybe you don't even know how to essentially use the computer, right? You could be, in essence, a computer illiterate, and therefore it causes you not to want to engage with the computer, and your ability to participate in this, new technology diminishes greatly because of your inability to know how the computer even functions. Like my mom is afraid of a computer. I still don't understand, but anyways, well, she's older. So anyways, transparency problems is like, how do you know the things that you're reading are actually true, right? It's unclear. So some of you, for instance, will end up citing, for instance, housewives from Nebraska in your case studies or in your group projects. And I'll wonder myself, well, I know why you're doing it, but I also think to myself, well, like they probably could have found a better source in this housewife from Nebraska or this person from Idaho, but you end up citing random people because you don't always do your homework in terms of like, should I really think of this person or this article as authority? And so sometimes it's hard to figure out. It's hard to know what's authentic and what's not. It's really challenging at times. And then, of course, this idea of corporate versus the grassroots. Sometimes they work in synchronicity. In other words, they work perfectly well. If you think about things like Paranormal Activity, right, where essentially the distributor asks the fans, yes, release your movie in this theater. It works very well sometimes, and sometimes they clash, right? If you think about piracy. So one of the big issues when the internet first started was the fact that a lot of us were just stealing stuff online because it was easily accessible. And that would be an example of clashing, right? You don't want to pay $20 for an album, so I'll just poach my favorite song for free. And so this is clashing. So one of the things that Henry Jenkins talks about is this idea that fan culture, and this is really now drilling down to his theory, is fan culture online is more active, more intense, more passionate than fandom outside of the internet. Some of you, I know, for instance, the other class, my Monday class pointed out that BTS fans are like crazy, especially online. I don't know if this is true because I don't look at social media for BTS, but this is what they told me, that they're crazy and highly active and super passionate. And so Henry Jenkins says that this is cool and this is good because it can help the producers of content in terms of the production. So in other words, the producer could ask the fans, right? So what do you think should be the storyline for the following season, for instance? They can ask the fans, what do you think would be the best way to promote our movie or our television program? Or using, or for distribution, in other words, asking the fans where they should place the movie in terms of theaters. That's what I mean by distribution. And so Jenkins believes this is really good, that we can harness the power of the fans online so we can make decisions in our production, promotion, and distribution. And also, he believes that it's important for producers of content to look at how fans are using their texts. This idea of textual poaching, like how do fans subvert or use text online? It should be kind of cool for producers to really examine that and think about how it's being poached, not just simply get mad and go, oh, I'm blocking it, cease and desist, don't use it, don't access it. That he believes that's bad. And so this idea of simply looking at ratings or box office or sales is not a good measurement. You should be looking at how people use your products. And also, right, this idea of, again, this is more of a question, important to think about how much you want to include fans in storytelling. Sometimes it's a good idea, and again, sometimes it may not be. And again, it's important for producers to know that fans will often distribute and interpret content. In other words, right, one thing that fans will do is that they'll take something and forward it to their friends. Again, the idea of using influencers to generate a gigantic buzz online. LimeWire, yes, LimeWire. Didn't LimeWire get taken down? Some of the other classes mentioned fan cams. I'm sure most of you have heard of this fan cam thing. Nobody's heard of fan cam? Okay, so I'm just going to play a little clip of this because really the Blair Witch Project was really the first movie to really take advantage of this idea of social media marketing or viral marketing, this idea of being able to use social media to generate a gigantic buzz. Really, Blair Witch Project was really the first film that started this. And now other movies have borrowed some ideas from the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, all right, I'll call back, whatever.
Getting phone calls like
About the kids.
Here we go.
So we just kind
we started getting phone calls like, oh, we hear you're in Sundance.
there was a lot of interest. There's a lot of people asking questions. So we just kind of put up this website with some facts about the kids, the disappearance and some photos, and kind of treated it like a real event, like a real disappearance. The website became very popular, and by the time we went to Sundance, we had a mailing list of like 10,000 members, which is pretty huge for back in the day.
So I think all that vibe kind of like fed really well into Sundance. So we kind of rolled into Sundance and there was already this buzz about the movie.
We were all so excited for our premiere at midnight, and we come around the corner from the Egyptian Theater and there's this long alley that's the waiting area, and that alley was completely full. It was hundreds and hundreds of people.
Our agents were telling us that all these people from all these companies were there. Pretty much everybody that had the ability to buy a film was at that screening. And the screening went really well.
Everybody was talking about the movie. Everybody was excited. People were kind of coming out, is this real? Some were angry, some were like completely, like their mouths were hanging open.
And then around 2 o'clock in the morning, we got a call, and the artisan people wanted to talk to our lawyers and our representatives.
And they said, we want to buy the movie. We want to buy it tonight.
And then it was confirmed. We sold, and next morning, everything changed. We were doing interviews. We were being shuttled around as the first sale of Sundance. And before we knew it, we were on magazines and articles being written up. We had a Variety reporter following us around the entire week. All kinds of crazy stuff just happened.
It was this just crazy whirlwind. And so we were still kind of involved with it at that time. That was before they realized that they would have had a much easier time marketing it if we were really dead. So they did the best they could to simulate that. It was basically the first viral marketing that ever happened.
Once Artisan bought us, they took the website down and they redesigned it and they put it up section by section. So they knew the power of that website, and I think the website was, one of the most highly trafficked websites of that year.
This was sort of pretty close to the dawn of internet marketing for movies, and you got this film that's shot on video. So it looks like minding your home videos. Nothing ever looked like that on a big screen before, ever. So you have all these elements coming into play. It kind of just exploded all over the world.
We platformed and opened at the Angelica.
So again, if you think about, oops, there's questions. Yes, it was a cultural reset. And so one of the people who ran the campaign, her name was Amaret Jones. So Amaret Jones, who I actually worked with at one point in time, I should have asked her about Blair Witch, but she actually was the person who marketed the Blair Witch Project. She's the one that, I'm not sure if she's the one that actually bought the movie, but she marketed the movie, and through Artisan. And so one thing that ended up happening that was, yes, a cultural reset was, I remember I was living in Texas when this movie came out, and but I used to live in Maryland, and so people started sending me emails with the link of the website saying, "Hey, is this really true? Does this really happen? Because I know you used to live in Maryland. Is this really true?" And I was like, "No, this is fake. There's no way. This is not even based on a true story. There's no way this happened." I would have remembered, because I used to live in Maryland, if 3 kids that were essentially my age would have disappeared in Western Maryland. I would have remembered. And that never happened. Can you imagine the buzz if that would have happened in the news? So, but that's how the buzz on social media began, was essentially that people were sending this link to one another, asking them, is this really true? Did this really happen? And so that was the age, or the dawn, or the cultural reset of the internet, and how the internet became an important role in marketing a particular film. And because of social media, this particular movie generated a gigantic buzz. And again, so that's Henry Jenkins. All right, reinforcement and phenomenistic theory. And so by Thomas Clapper. And so one of the things that Clapper discusses is that when we watch media, we want to avoid cognitive dissonance, right? So in other words, going back to my friend who's highly political, who I know is Republican, and who watches, at least gets lots of conservative, does a lot of research on the conservative websites and things like that. It's not likely that that person is going to watch CNN or MSNBC, because it's watching those things are going to contest his beliefs, right? Especially if they're right about something. And so, and if he starts feeling like uneasy about potentially some information being true that goes against his ideology or his inner core of beliefs, he may start feeling this idea of cognitive dissonance. It's like, oh no, right? And then once you start experiencing cognitive dissonance, you may start rationalizing, right, your behavior. And so anyways, what Clapper says is that we want to avoid that feeling. And so we only watch things that where we don't feel this. So in other words, if you're a Democrat, you're going to watch MSNBC or CNN. If you're a Republican, you're going to watch Fox, and your social media, whatever you read on social media, is going to reflect your political ideologies for the most part, because you want to avoid cognitive dissonance. Make sense? And so therefore, right, you're going to practice these 3 things: selective exposure, right, because you're only going to watch things that fit your belief, number 1. And so, in other words, did your product work? Because, it didn't make anybody feel uncomfortable. There was no cognitive dissonance. there is selective retention. In other words, you're only going to remember things that fit your ideology. So if you're watching Fox and say you're a Republican and they're being critical of the Republican Party, you're not going to remember that part. You're only going to remember the parts where they say nice things about the Republican Party, depending on how hardcore you are. Same with Democrats, mind you. And then there's selective perception, right? Perceived through a personal lens. What you let in and what you don't let in. We can control this, right? And it's our selective perception is influenced by our friends, our family, our church, all sorts of things. Our social circle affects our selective perception. So one of the things that Clapper says, right, is the media just maintains our status quo. In other words, right, if you like that brand, let's say it's Nike or Apple or that movie, right, or that star or whatever, it just maintains the status quo. It's just reinforcing what you already believed. So it doesn't really change anything per se, unless the media is introducing something brand new into our society. But for the most part, it's just the status quo. It's just the status quo. In other words, a commercial isn't necessarily going to change your opinion about a particular product. So for example,
Come on, guys!
Ooh-wee. Take it to the house, kid.
Where's he going?
Take it to the house, kid.
Take it to the house, kid!
Big boys always trying to show off. Let them get their little shine.
Hey, guys!
Take it to the house, kid.
Hey, take it to the house, kid. Take those to the car.
Give him a tip, will you, Joe? Yeah, give him a tip, all right.
Hey, Kirsten!
Take it to the house!
Hey, Nigel! Sorry, Julian. Nice kick, Harley! What up, Gary?
all right, so this is a really cute commercial. It's a good commercial, actually. So this is obviously, it's an NFL commercial promoting the fact that the NFL has been around for 100 years and hopefully for another 100 years afterwards. And really, right, whatever your feelings are about football, this commercial doesn't change it, right? If you love football or love the NFL, then this commercial is just reinforcing the fact that, you think the NFL is great, you think it's the best sport on planet Earth, or at least one of the better sports on planet Earth, those sorts of things. Doesn't change your opinion about the league at all. Now, of course, if you don't like the NFL, maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend watches too many games. Maybe you don't like the fact that, it's really rough and physical game and people's bodies end up being broken afterwards. They're never really quite the same in many cases. And you don't like that. And so that'd be, by the way, a fair criticism. And so that's not going to change your opinion just because you watch this ad and go, you think it's cute, but it doesn't change your opinion about the league, right? Or about the sport. Again, it just goes, you might look at this and say, well, this is just a bunch of propaganda. It's cute, but it's propaganda. I'm not buying it. Interesting. That's weird. That is weird. So is that clear that really media doesn't change your opinion about anything? Your opinion before the ad is really not changing. If you didn't like it before, the advertisement doesn't change it. If you liked it before, then you're going to keep liking it. Unless the product is absolutely brand new and you have no knowledge of it, then maybe it might change your opinion one way or the other. Very good, Gabrielle. Yes, give it a menorah. Yes, well done. All right, and this is the last theory I'm going to talk about today because I think I'm running out of time. Doesn't tell you what to think, just what to think about. Oh, there you go. Interesting. Yes, that is a quote. McLuhan. All right, so uses and gratifications, and I'm going to post maybe one or two more theories up, so just in case that might be useful for some of you that we're not going to get to. So uses and gratifications, this idea that media users use media and media text to satisfy certain psychological needs, right? If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so like there's safety and security, there's this idea of love and acceptance and this hierarchy, right? And so media, essentially, according to uses and gratifications, fulfills one of those needs within the hierarchy. And this theory assumes that we're not passive. We're making some active choices in interpreting and integrating certain types of media into our lives. So again, we're not this passive couch potato. So if we don't like something, we're going to change it. And if it's not meeting our needs, we're going to change it. And so one of the things that this is important about uses and gratifications is that yes, media is active, but it's also goal-oriented. In other words, we use media for certain purposes. So for instance, maybe your circle of friends really loves watching the NFL, for instance. Maybe your circle of friends really likes watching a certain program. And so to connect with them, you too will watch it because that's the goal. You may watch media because it's the funniest thing out there, at least in your opinion. It may provide an escape for you, right? So even though some people say escapism is bad, sometimes I think escapism is really good, especially if you're kind of getting stressed out. Then an escape might be okay. And so this particular media, it enables you to escape your reality for a little while. Maybe your purpose is educational, right? Maybe you're going to learn something from watching this particular type of media. And this, in your opinion, is the best educational tool out there, at least when it comes to movies or documentaries or whatever. Or maybe it's relatable, right? Of everything that you know, the characters are most relatable, so therefore you watch it. So whether it's some sort of reality television, like let's say, I don't know, The Bachelor or Bachelorette, you find the characters on there relatable, so therefore that's the reason why you watch it. And of course, there might be multiple factors, right? Your friends or family or friends, well, friends or family, or maybe your classmates also watch it. So this idea of connecting with others might be part of the relatable. And so the audience links pleasure with media. So this idea that you get pleasure from watching this particular type of media, like for instance, this idea that you watch mystery programs because you want to try to figure out who did it. Current media, other sources like people can be companions or compete for pleasure. So in other words, if you're a huge fan of the NFL, right, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, can be your companion in watching the games. Or they may be non-fans and hate this and might be competing with the television for your attention. Now, again, the person can change. You're active. Last couple points is audience assists with media research. In other words, the audience tells you why they're watching a specific thing, but you have to be, again, self-aware. And value judgments. So, in other words, you're the only one that's valuing the content. Other people shouldn't value you or value the content and basically tell you you're wrong for watching that. In other words, shame you. In other words, right, let's just say you like The Bachelor or Bachelorette. Your other friends or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whoever shouldn't shame you because you like watching that show. You're the one that gets pleasure from it. And so you're the only one that really should be valuing it, not the people who are criticizing you for watching it. So I know I went a little bit over. Sorry. Any questions about uses and gratifications? Any last questions regarding the group project? Good question, Jesse. Well, I mean, depends on the number of people that are in your group, but the best groups honestly don't talk very long, maybe 3 to 5 minutes max. And again, if you have 5 people in your group, the max should be 4 minutes. If you have 4 people in your group, the max should be probably 5 minutes. But really, the best presentations are usually about 15 minutes long, honestly. There's no minimum or maximum for paper length. Generally speaking, the best papers are between 25 to 35 pages is usually about the best. Those are usually the best papers. But I've also had a paper that was 50 pages long that was amazing. Yep, I had a group that wrote 50 pages, yeah. They did Black Panther. It was 5 people in a group, so 50 pages, 10 pages a piece. Not that big of a stretch, actually. Well, and of course you're doing Black Panther, right? Which means it's a Marvel movie, as well as Disney, and so Disney and Marvel movies get lots of press and lots of coverage. So think about the number of articles that they could actually look at. So it's easy actually to write 50 pages if you have that much information at your disposal. No questions? So if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. I'm going to be like a crazy person this weekend, but I will get back to your email. Tordorf narrative theory. This will be the last theory I talk about that might be useful for some of you in terms of your case study. And so for this particular theorist, right, this idea of narrative structure. So most movies that we watch, right, if you think about traditional, typical Hollywood cinema, even in some cases, even non-traditional independent, you always have a beginning, middle, and an end, right? And so if you think about the 3 parts, the beginning is obviously the introduction. Usually it's about at least in modern cinema. It's usually about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we have the second act or the middle part where something goes wrong and the protagonist is trying to fix it. And then the last part, the resolution, which is usually 10 or 15 minutes. Usually the third act is pretty short. And so if you think about this narrative theory, right, he basically talks about the fact that in a narrative, we typically have 5 parts. And so we have equilibrium, which is normal. So if you think about almost every single movie that you've watched, in this American film, if we start with normal, what is normal? What is their everyday life like? And you see them living their normal life, whether it's living in a middle-class environment with a nice home, but you see their normal, with their group of friends, normal. Number 2, we have a disruption. This is typically where the plot twist occurs and normal is no longer quite normal. Normal has become unbalanced or unique. And so now they're normal, or their world has been sort of turned upside down. So for instance, that plot twist could be like a parent dying, right? Or a sibling dying, or getting their heart broken by their boyfriend or girlfriend, some sort of plot twist. Recognition, right? The recognition is where the protagonist acknowledges the problem. So after the plot twist, for a period of time, the protagonist doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that, their life has been altered, or at least they're in denial. Recognition is recognizing that, okay, we do have a problem that certainly needs to be solved, but the protagonist first and foremost needs to acknowledge this is actually a problem that they need to address. Which leads to the fourth part, which is where the protagonist tries to fix the problem. Now, mind you, disruption, recognition, and repair all happen in the middle part of the narrative. And then the last part is where the problem is either fixed or not fixed. And then we have a new normal. So whether or not the problem gets fixed at the end or doesn't get fixed at the end, the protagonist is now living in a new normal. Their new life moving forward is going to be different than it was at the beginning of the movie. And so what Toradov basically talks about when he talks about the producer's ideology, right? Think about how some narratives celebrate certain things. And so it may reflect a producer's ideology. For instance, why do we always celebrate, let's say, democracy in our movies, or celebrate capitalism? Or why do we demonize certain groups of people in our narratives, right? It may reflect the producer's ideology, their set of beliefs. Why do we have certain countries as the enemy, for instance? And so these things that might be embedded in the story, right, may tell us who is, or what is the ideology of that particular individual that is creating the story.